Got it.
So let us pray. Look with pity, O heavenly God, upon the people in this land and this nation and this world who live with injustice, terror, disease, and death as their constant companions. Have mercy upon us. Help us to eliminate our cruelty to these our neighbors. Strengthen those who spend their lives establishing equal protection of the law and equal opportunities for all. And grant that every one of us may enjoy a fair portion of the riches of this land and this world, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So I am going to show you, not that. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to start with a statement from Bishop Hirschfeld, Rob Hirschfeld, from New Hampshire, and we'll listen to about 5 minutes of it. Then a very short statement from Bishop Thomas Brown, which is more about Lambeth in general, not so much about the specific issues. Then a short statement from Bishop Leon Johnson of Missouri, who's Dion Johnson, who's the only Black gay bishop. And then a note from Bishop of Arizona, Jennifer Riddall, who I know through SCLM. And then a longer statement from our bishop, which I thought maybe we could read in parts so we hear different voices. But I'm going to bring up this, and I'm going to try here. I'm going to stop share because I want to do the thing where I tell it to optimize for video clip. There we go. I'm going to start this now, and I'm going to turn it to, oh dear, I just lost my page. I'm going to start it at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So, all right.
Bishop, thank you for being with us today to talk.
I'm kind of narrating this so people who watch this later will understand.
You are a representative of New Hampshire when you attend the conference. So how did you bring New Hampshire with you, especially in conversations with other bishops?
Thanks. Yes, it isn't a legislative body, so that we don't go there with the expectation. Well, some of us might have the expectation that we're going to go there and make some kind of pronouncement by which all Episcopalians or all members of the Anglican Communion are going to be called upon to obey and adhere to. Instead, I bring New Hampshire because this time in particular, I brought New Hampshire with me, and I really felt that I brought New Hampshire with me in a particular way, in a special way, because in 2008, which was when the last Lambeth conference was held, my predecessor, as you know, Bishop Gene Robinson, was not invited to participate, being the first openly gay bishop in the Anglican Communion. And that caused such a scandal, a stumbling block, an issue for many bishops within the Anglican Communion, that the Archbishop of Canterbury at that time, Rowan Williams, felt that it would not be helpful to have him there. So this time I was invited. Many gay, lesbian bishops were also invited, and we participated. And I got to share what it means to be a faithful disciple of Jesus, or to what we're trying to do is be faithful disciples of Jesus in this particular corner of God's world in the Granite State. And I got to listen to some amazing stories of what God is up to in other parts of the world as Anglicans.
What were some of the most memorable conversations that you had?
Well, there was one bishop from Papua New Guinea, which is just about as far away from New Hampshire as you can get. It's in the southern hemisphere, essentially Southeast Asia, just north of Australia. And he was lamenting how his diocese is shrinking in numbers, but also physically. because of the rise in sea levels due to global climate change, is actually taking away land. And it's not that people are, being flooded, but the threat of floods and the loss of beachheads means that there's less habitable spaces to live. So many people in his diocese are becoming what I learned, this new phrase, environmental refugees. They're leaving not because of civil war or unrest, but because it's simply becoming uninhabitable to live on their islands or within the Diocese of Papua New Guinea, the province of Papua New Guinea. So hearing those kinds of stresses was amazing. I sat at table with two bishops whom I befriended from South Sudan, whose cultural experience coming out of a civil war is drastically different than what we experience here.
Well,
To be a Christian is, in many ways, to put your life on the line in a culture which is predominantly Christian, but has some very hostile influences that are presenting themselves. So those are just two. To meet friends from around the world, where we were going to have to take a vote. We were going to be asked to take a vote. Do you accept that the sole definition of Christian marriage has been, is now, and always will be only between a man and a woman? Or can we accept that in some parts of the communion, we have a different experience, which that is, yes, of course, that is the traditional viewpoint of marriage, and that is valid. And not but and here in New Hampshire, for instance, where there is marriage equality, we could acknowledge that this is our experience in fact, most places in the Church of the United States, the Church in the United States, the Episcopal Church in the United States, and acknowledge that that's a real too. So we're not going to be sanctioned or punished or excluded, but not necessarily agreed with at all, but acknowledged as this is, after deep reflection and prayer, this is the state of our discernment now. So I was both, I had low expectations of the depths of our fellowship, and I was really happily surprised that God showed up in that way.
What I'd like to do, if it's okay with all of you, is go through the different things and then have our conversation afterwards. So maybe take notes. Does that make sense? I know I already have some of my own reactions. So the next one up will be Thomas Brown. Oh, hi, Bill. Thomas Brown, the Bishop of Maine, who is a gay man. Rob Hirschfeld is not. Rob, by the way, has some wonderful books on depression and emotional stuff. He's one of the most honest men emotionally that I know. Thomas Brown came out of the Vermont, and he is the Bishop of Maine. So hold on. Not yet, actually. I just need to get up the next.
Isn't that who it is? It looks like it's me.
I'm just getting all of you that are watching. This is Stan trying to get to his there. Bishop Thomas Brown of Maine. As soon as this comes up.
What if you could do SEO?
There's going to be a 4-second YouTube ad, so pay no attention to that. I'm now going to share screen. Okay, ready?
SEO smarter and faster. With Wix, you can edit your meta tags.
Hello, Church in the province of New England. My name is Thomas Brown, and I'm the Bishop of Maine. And I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the Lambeth Conference and what we did today around Anglican identity, especially as it relates to who we are as the Anglican Communion. And what I want to first say is I feel so grateful to be part of a community in New England in which we are connected relationally and missionally. that our connections across our dioceses in northern New England and southern New England are really about respect for and commitment to how each of us is responding to God and to our call in our respective dioceses, and figuring out ways that we can come together throughout the region. And the reason that that's important is because what I heard today among the bishops who are gathered here is that that's what we want for the whole world. We want to be able to affirm linked dioceses and companion dioceses, and to be able to say that what we did during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and what we did around international debt relief, and what we might do about climate change, that's what will make us the Anglican Communion. Not structures or a sense of bureaucracy, but the way in which we might respond to God's mission. The other thing I heard today that was surprising to me and completely delightful is that the bishops at my table, who are my Bible study group, we all agreed the same thing, that it's about mission and relationships. So for instance, a bishop from Zambia, 2 bishops from the South Sudan, a bishop from India, a bishop from the Philippines, a bishop from England, we together all agreed that this is about affirming our call rather than creating a structure. Something that surprised me was the way in which the entire Lambeth Conference affirmed that we want more lay people to be engaged in who the Anglican Communion is and how decisions are made. It's all well and good for the Archbishop of Canterbury to have his role, for the primates meeting to have their role, for the Anglican Consultative Council, which includes lay people, to have their role, and for the Lambeth Conference to have its role. But we need Indigenous women, youth, and lay people to have a bigger voice. I am thrilled that we get to model this way of life in New England, and I'm grateful to all of you. God bless you. Thank you for your prayers. We'll see you as soon as we get home.
So there you have 2 bishops, the Bishop of New Hampshire and the Bishop of Maine. What I'd like to do now is read the statement from Dion Johnson. I'll ask one of you to read the statement from Jennifer Riddall, and then I think we can share reading the statement from our own Bishop Shannon. So let me just go back to screen share, and then I'm going to pull up this document. Can you all see it? I also want to do this so I can see all of you better. Can you see it all right?
Yeah. Where's he from? Missouri.
Just a minute. I'm going to have this so I can see all of you. I can see all of you too. Good. So this is Bishop Dion Johnson, Bishop of Missouri, the only Black gay bishop in the Episcopal Church. I don't know about elsewhere.
A blue link.
He says to me, "Family is messy. Last summer, bishops from across the family of Anglican Communion gathered for the Lambeth Conference. Like any family, there are those who connect instantly and renew bonds of love and affections, and there are those who simply agree to disagree yet walk in love together. In many ways, the gathering was an opportunity to be incarnational to each other and to bring our varied context into a shared experience. One of the gifts Lambeth offered was to show the changing face of the Anglican Communion and to offer space for deep conversations. One of the most anticipated conversations was around human sexuality, and as a whole, LGBTQIA+ persons and their allies were represented among the bishops. The voices of the out LGBTQIA+ bishops were a part of the conversation, which added to the incarnational nature of our faith. As the only openly gay bishop in the Anglican Communion of African descent, I particularly valued the many bishops in contexts where my ministry would be a significant challenge, who prayerfully and deeply engaged me in conversation. The conversations were characterized by a sense of wanting to learn rather than to convert. One conversation in particular has stayed with me. One of my sibling bishops from the Global South wanted to know how to support the LGBTQIA+ community in a way that honors where his province stands on human sexuality, while recognizing the pastoral need to honor and care for the LGBTQIA+ who are being vilified in his country. It was a good reminder that as a church, we are not monolithic in our understanding or our expression, and even in our deep disagreements, we are able to disagree without being disagreeable. So Bishop Dion is a good guy. That's his view. I work with him on the SCLM, so I'll see him again online next week. Would one of you read Bishop of Arizona, Jennifer Radal's message?
I will.
Great, thank you.
Last summer, I believe the Lambeth Conference was ultimately good overall for the LGBTQ plus community in Africa, though not without some reservations. Some bishops who are supportive of the LGBTQ plus community, but who are isolated in their own provinces, were able to find support and community from bishops in provinces that have advanced same-sex marriage and the ordination of members of the LGBTQ plus community. Others, like Bishop John Oringa of Kenya, who was at my table, admitted that he didn't know anything about gay or lesbian relationships because in his context it was so taboo, but said he was curious to hear more after my description of marrying two women. To me, staying in relationship with Bishop John and others like him give the capacity for listening and transformation. And so we are visiting this summer, along with some of my diocesan folks.
And she's going to take one of her queer diocesan staff with her, just so you know. And then the last thing is a message about Lambeth from our own Bishop Shannon. And there's quite a few paragraphs here. And it's my thought that we will read this, each taking a paragraph. I'll start and then we can just go down the screen if that's okay. Here we are. In July, my family traveled to Europe, first to France for a vacation and then to England for the Lambeth Conference, a once every decade meeting of bishops from across the Anglican Communion. When our family arrived at Lambeth, Phil, that's her husband, as an invited spouse, Annalise as a Lambeth steward, and me as a bishop, we didn't know what to expect. Would Jane or Betsy do this next paragraph?
Want to do that, Jane?
Okay. We had been on vacation when the Lambeth calls arrived in my inbox. I read with dismay the human dignity call that unexpectedly sought the reaffirmation of Lambeth 1.10, a statement of the 1998 Lambeth Conference that denied the belovedness and full inclusion of LGBTQ people and the blessedness of their relationships. As a family, we discussed this gathering storm. We wondered how we should enter this encounter, knowing there would be people who bore ill will for people we love. We wondered how to convey the complexity of the situation that was for us a new way of experiencing the legacy of imperialism and colonialism that we already know so well at home.
Betsy, would you take this next paragraph?
Sure. On the first day of the Lambeth Conference, some of my fears were eased. I was so happy to see the people with brown skin were in the majority. I rarely experience a situation where my skin doesn't stand out, and I was glad not to be in the minority. A bishop from an Asian country greeted me as a friend. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Where are your people from?"
Sylvia,
Go ahead.
Sylvia, can you see this well enough to read it? If not, we'll.
Yeah, just about. My skin made me part of a powerful majority, but as a woman and as a bishop who is
Committed
to full inclusion, I was in a decided minority. Although there were many more female bishops at Lambeth this year than in 2008, it is still very difficult for women to become bishops in many provinces of the Anglican Communion. In some of those provinces, women cannot even be priests. And only in a few provinces can openly LGBTQ people be ordained, much less become bishops. And so I rejoiced in the racial diversity present at Lambeth. I grieved the continued exclusion based on gender and sexuality.
Jenny, could you take the next paragraph?
Sure. But Jesus calls us to include, and that is the perspective I shared with my colleagues in my study group. I ensure that people are physically safe in our communities. I said that I would not know how to exclude people from the sacraments that support us as followers of Jesus, trying to make our way in this world.
Noma? That's in the intern, my study group. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. In turn, my study group partners talked about their struggles and experiences in ministry. A bishop from Tanzania talked about lack of food and clean water and described the imperialism that had decimated his country. They gave us guns, he said, referring to the British colonists. We fought each other while they stole everything.
Bill, would you take a turn with my colleague from South Sudan?
My screen is partially blocked. Better go on to the next person.
Okay. Miriam, can you see that, my colleague from South Sudan?
My colleague from South Sudan told me that we would get to full inclusion one day, but that right now, he is concerned with stopping men from having 10 wives. Another bishop from Belize came to understand that for me, working for LGBTQ, equality is about including all of God's people in the body of Christ. Our conversations were holy ones, and no one tried to convince anyone else. Still, on the final day of the conference, my Tanzanian friend found out that he had lost church funding for theological training. That was his punishment for attending a Lambeth conference where LGBTQ bishops were included.
I'll continue here. I was always uncomfortable at Lambeth. It was difficult to experience the amount of deference accorded to bishops from the United States because of the economic privilege we have and the extent to which we use it to support the Anglican Communion Office's budget. It was painful to see the ways that African bishops, whose countries have suffered great injustice and exclusion at the hands of the British, were so determined to exclude LGBTQ people. The refusal of the South Sudanese bishops to take communion disturbed me to my core and brought me to tears. And it was sobering to understand that in all likelihood, we can expect more Anglican division over human sexuality at conferences and meetings in years to come. Jenny, would you do the yet in the midst?
Yet in the midst of the political intrigue and politics, I became even more aware that all of us at Lambeth were operating in a structure that exists only because of British colonialism and imperialism. Anglicanism spread around the globe with colonizers and enslavers, and the evils of that history live on today in the way we seek to exclude one another. We learned far too well from our colonizers how to hurt and degrade one another as they hurt and degraded us.
Wow.
Noma, would you take the Anglican Communion?
The Anglican Communion is not peaceful or painless, and the Lambeth Conference was a vivid demonstration of that fact. But I know that the conversations I had with my Bible study partners and with other bishops I encountered during our 2-week stay made a positive difference. And in turn, they changed my understanding of just how complex the conversation of human dignity and inclusion is across the communion.
Why don't you just go ahead?
It is my prayer that we can stay in these Anglican Communion conversations. Most importantly, to bear witness to the belovedness of LGBTQ people and the holiness of their relationships. But I also know that by staying in relationship with Anglicans across the globe, we are rejecting the legacy of colonialism and refusing to play out the imperial pantomimes that too often draw on the worst parts of our shared history to separate us from one another. Those Anglican traditions are not worth keeping, and I pray that we commit ourselves to throwing them off and creating a new shared Anglican history in which all of God's children are free.
So let me just say, now you've heard statements from several bishops, including our own. It seems to me there is one theme that's echoed by many of them, that it's good to stay in communion so we can continue to have conversations, that many African bishops have never met queer people and were interested in that they have other things on their plate, like 10 wives and people starving, that to them are the top issues. And then I think there are also, there's that shadow of colonialism piece, which says, you taught us to do this, now you're telling us not to. Well, you brought homophobia to us, now you're telling us it's the wrong thing to do. So all of those things are there. And I have to say, I have some sympathy for all that. And yet on a day like today, when Uganda is passing laws where people's lives are threatened, LGBTQ people's lives are threatened, it also, that side needs to be heard. So this is an open conversation time. We can take as much time as we want, up to 8, or we can stop sooner. We're not going to work on a resolution till our next meeting. So this is really a time, it's still recording, so bear that in mind, so others can hear what you say and hear this discussion. This is a time just to express your thoughts on all of these issues, which have some grayness and lack of clarity to them, and some of them don't. So who would like to go first?
I just have a request.
Sure.
Stan, is it possible to send us those transcripts?
I will.
Bishop Shannon's was so complex that I need to read that a couple of times.
I will. You can see I have that all on the thing, including the links to the.
Okay, thank you.
I will send it to all of. I think. How do I do this? Well, I'll just write down your names now and send it to all of you right now, and then I'll have Jennifer included in the next e-news. Because it's a useful document, and it also has the last page that you didn't see is the resolution that we created for the last convention. So it looks like this. It's about a 6-page, 7-page thing. So yes, I will do that.
One thing I was struck by, I would have assumed that bigotry is the foundation of people being opposed to the LGBTQ plus community. I had not thought about the colonialism impact. That I had not thought about. So that's something to spend time contemplating.
Do you think I think it's a sincere thing when people say it, when especially like Black leaders in Africa. On the other hand, I also think sometimes it's a cover. And the LGBTQ response, like Bishop Dion's, is because the colonial forces brought you something that is unjust and oppressive, does not mean you should continue to do it. In a way, you're buying into that very colonial sin by continuing this thing.
Good point. Yeah. I really liked the things Shannon said, about continuing the conversation about, I should have taken notes myself, but the way she spoke of things was a sort of a both and kind of thing. I mean, the problem, but needing to stay in conversation. But I noticed particularly the part about from the African bishop that he had not ever met a gay or lesbian person. He probably has, but didn't know it. Because you think he must think that there's something very aberrant about these people. And
Told me about saying to one of those African bishops, she says, "Would you like to meet a gay bishop?" Yes, please. I'm sure that wasn't propaganda, but taking him by the hand and introducing. I don't know if it was to Thomas Brown or Dion Johnson. Dion must have, I'm going to ask him when I meet with him again, what was that like to be the only Black gay bishop in the whole Anglican communion? Well, that's really being on call in the strongest ways. He's a very energetic, articulate, joyful young man. So,
I
Jane?
grew up in the Methodist Church in North Carolina. And I have said oftentimes that the Methodist Church taught me to love God and hate myself. Now, there are two pieces to that. The first is that because I went to Duke University initially, they put me on some sort of board as the token college student in the Western North Carolina Conference. And it was at that conference that I first learned about the central jurisdiction and the way in which Black Methodists were separated from the Eastern and Western Conference. And I was so outraged that I wrote them a nasty letter and resigned from this committee. And then fortunately, God plunked down in front of me in the form of some Quakers who said, "We're not against anybody." And I was like, oh, actually, that's not completely true. There are some pastoral friends in certain parts of the country who have ministers and are actually quite racist. But the fact is that the Episcopalians didn't officially get a hold of me until I went to boarding school in Virginia at Chatham Hall. And my mother sent me there because she knew rich Episcopalian girls. She didn't know what church they were, but she knew rich girls went there. And what I discovered the day I got there was that 3/4 of the school was from New England and the Middle Atlantic states. And my mother was not pleased when I came home at Thanksgiving and announced that Black people were equal to white people, and that I wasn't going to say the Apostles' Creed in church anymore, because in my religion classes and studying theologians and so forth, I had become an agnostic, which was a word I didn't know when I went to this Episcopal school. It turns out that my great-grandmother many years ago on one side of my family was an Episcopalian, but she was long gone, and I never got to talk with her about her views. But the church in North Carolina, when I lived there, I grew up in a completely segregated culture. I was born in 1944, and my schools, even through the 10th grade, which is after which I went to boarding school, were completely segregated. So was my Episcopal boarding school, I might add. But at least some of us had begun to raise some issues. That school now has students from all over the world, including Africa and lots of places. But one of my favorite teachers was fired shortly after I graduated for being gay. I knew better than to let anybody know I was gay.
But how do you think that, what's the progression in your school?
Well, what's the progression now?
No, I mean, how did it, do you think it evolved that they became enlightened?
You mean about Black people? Because they still.
No, about gay people, but well, people other than, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Well, if you went to a girls' boarding school in the South where rich people sent their daughters, you could pretty much guess that many of the families were, well, we didn't have a two-party system in part of the South back then. I grew up in a completely one-party system. North Carolina only had Southern Democrats running the government. Now it only has right-wing Republicans running the government. Their views are very similar. But for me, it was that I was carrying a secret with me that if I shared it with anybody, they would assure me that I was depraved and that, God thought I was unsalvageable and all those kinds of things that have been generated over the years in Christianity. And it took me longer than some people to get over my self-hatred because I had a family that disinherited me because I was gay. That was one of my punishments. They had a lot of money and they took it away from me to make sure that I had to work hard and have, well, be that as it may, I just think it's the quality of relationships that the Episcopal Church taught me that made me go home and announce who I was. Well, I didn't announce I was gay, but I announced that I was an agnostic and announced that I wasn't going to discriminate against Black people. And, so I have to say that now the Methodist Church will not let me lead a workshop for it, and they will not let me be ordained in it. And they will not bless the marriage that Betsy and I had in Quaker meeting almost 20 years ago. It's the relationship piece that we got, well, however we legislate it or require it or set it up, that's got to happen.
That's what many of our bishops say, is the Anglican Communion offers them an opportunity for relationship, even though everyone does not agree. They also are careful to point out that the Anglican Communion is not a church. It's many provinces that have their own jurisdiction, the Episcopal Church being a province in that parlance, that have their own jurisdiction, and the Anglican Communion cannot tell us what to do. They can do these sort of sense of the meeting, to use Quaker words, kind of things, but they have no authority over us. So, and we don't need to decide this now, but I'll be interested in where we get to in terms of how do we stay in the conversation, but how do we make it very clear in a strong way to the powers that be, and at Lambeth Palace, the Archbishop of Canterbury and his staff, that it is not okay to just simply say, oh, they have a different history and they're in a difficult situation. I think there needs to be some strong way to say to Lambeth that we are appalled, disappointed, angry, and concerned at the plight of LGBTQ people in Africa, African Anglican Communion especially, and the needs of the LGBT community worldwide. And we don't have to get there yet, but it's a bit of a quandary. Thank you, Jane, for your good history. Sometime, Jane, you and I can give people a history seminar on Quaker history and tell them about the Evangelical Friends Alliance and Friends United Meeting and Friends General Conference.
The ones that won't let us do a workshop there either.
There's a broad, people think of Quakers as the only left-wing liberals, but there's a whole other world out there. Other people, thoughts about what we've heard this conversation?
That's something to ponder on. There's some comparison between the way that women have been entered into the Anglican Communion with LGBTQ. And I know a little bit about it, but I don't remember enough about it, and I'm not sure enough about it. But what was the progress that finally allowed women to be accepted? And I know that's not true. Even in Africa, it's still not true. So if there's, what kind of a parallel is there between the acceptance of women as being able to be clergy and to being able to have a part in the church other than just doing coffee hour, etc. And the place for LGBTQ.
Good. I wish Sally were here. I'll tell you what I know. There are several long processes. One was the road to same-sex marriage and LGBTQ ordination in the Episcopal Church. That was a long process. In the 19th century, some women banded together in houses of deaconesses and did a lot of social work and a lot of education of women. They were set apart by bishops, not in a mad way. That meant they were sort of given this title deaconess and set apart to God's work. They became very, very successful. And they really are, I think, the undergirding of the beginning of ordination of women. Those women were not ordained as deacons until a while before we began to ordain women as priests. But I believe that the eventual ordination, I have the timeline somewhere, but not in front of me, the eventual decision by General Convention to ordain women as deacons, and I'm going to just say that was in the 60s, 1960s, then led the way for the ordination of women as priests in the 1970s.
Right.
It was a long, long conversation with back and forth. I've been personally involved in the long, long, long conversation about same-sex marriage and ordination of gay bishops. And I would say that was a 40-year process. So there is something to be said, and I think Bishop Shannon's, for staying at the table so that we can influence over time these people who've never thought about same-sex marriage. I think what worries me is those people who want to kill LGBTQ people or put them in prison for the rest of their lives. There's not much conversation to be had there. But so do we say to the Anglican Communion, as some would have us say, we're out of here. This is not okay. Or we'll stick around, but we're not going to give you any money. Or we'll stick around and we won't fund anything that has to do with certain areas. Or here we are, we want you to know how upset we are and what an important issue this is, and we're going to keep on plugging, or any version of that. So I've said that more than once, but I think that's sort of the spectrum of possibilities, or do nothing.
I don't think nothing is an option.
Oh, I don't either.
I mean, we're probably farther ahead in the United States than most other countries. But I don't know most other countries.
I would be curious to hear from some African bishops what the conversation and tension is like in African provinces, because the Anglican Church of South Africa is quite progressive. I know there are a couple of other progressive provinces in Africa. Joining us in the Episcopal Church in sort of our view of women and LGBTQ issues, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Anglican Church of Scotland, Wales, Australia, and I can't name some of the others, but they're all sort of with us. Interestingly enough, the Church of England is playing catch up right now. They're ordaining women, but they're not doing same-sex marriages yet, but I think that will come soon. And some say that what Justin Welby did, this is just some people, by allowing that conversation about the biblical foundation of marriage to happen, was to prepare the way for the backlash he'll get from some of the conservative provinces when the Church of England allows same-sex marriage. But that's just supposition. Bob, Bill, were you going to say something? I couldn't tell if I heard your voice. Oh, was it you, Bob? No.
I was going to say something.
Please.
I've been thinking about this in kind of a really wide-angled lens way, partly because of some news pieces recently about the funding that's being poured into homophobic efforts in Africa by evangelical churches in America. And I know we're talking about Lambeth, talking about the Anglican Communion and what's going on in the Anglican Communion, but
Go ahead.
it seems like keeping that bigger picture in mind is important. And I guess part of the reason I say that is because I teach UVM, of course, and I teach medieval literature, which basically means teaching a lot of Christian literary texts from way back. And it's astonishing to me the kind of sort of general assumptions about Christianity that I find that students have, and basically those assumptions are that Christianity writ large is homophobic, imperialist, basically the Crusaders forever. And I don't know, I left the Methodist Church. I left church entirely for a long period of time, largely because of exactly this kind of thing. And I guess my personal hope is that the Anglican Communion will get its act together and be a kind of be the vanguard in this sort of global effort, because it is something bigger than just the Anglican Communion. I mean, if we're thinking about the future of Christianity on the planet, I think that's a little bit larger than the issue we've got right now of trying to draft the resolution. But I wonder if some, thinking about the larger framing of keeping that big picture in mind would be useful, because I think there's just a lot at stake.
Jenny, I think that was very relevant. And it helps me think about what I would like to consider, which is a statement that's strong enough to start a movement to push or persuade or support the Archbishop of Canterbury to start making statements about his displeasure or whatever, his sense of what's happening in some of those countries, and to call people out about it, because he really hasn't done that. Hi, Mary. And I think that would be I think that could be the core of our resolution, is sort of aimed at those people to get them to speak out. So I'm willing to be part of a imperfect Anglican Communion as long as our leaders are clearly moving us toward a more enlightened place and speaking out against injustice and oppression. So I thought what you said was perfect, and to put it in the context of how some of the conservative evangelical Christians are pouring money into these very homophobic things and these laws is very relevant. Hi, Mary. Just so you know, this has been recorded. We started at 6:30, and we're now in conversation about everything we saw. But I'm going to email everybody here, including you, the documents we started with, so you'll be able to catch up. More thoughts, please.
I don't have a hand.
Go ahead, Bob.
To raise here. It doesn't seem to be one on my screen.
That's okay. We can hear you. Just talk a little louder.
Yes, louder. Okay, let's see.
Maybe turn your microphone up.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, great. Okay, yes. Sure. Okay, well, I just wanted to mention that something some of you have heard before, and that is that Sylvia and I have had a dear friend in Uganda who we haven't actually seen in a number of years. His father was a bishop in Uganda. He expresses very homophobic views, and in discussing this with us, he has said that he feels in the church, the Christian churches in Uganda feel in competition with Islam, which at least there, I'm not sure, I don't know much about it, but he says there is extremely homophobic. And so that is an issue that happens there at least. And I would imagine in other countries where there is a significant Islamic population.
Islam, I
Not,
guess.
I wouldn't, it's not. There are other issues, I think, in addition to the Christian issues, but which are very real. I would not deny that at all. And, the issue of contention with Islam is a significant one, according to him. Just thought I'd mention that.
Thank you, Bob. That's something I've heard as well from some people who talked with some of the African bishops, where the countries are fairly evenly split between Christians and Muslims. That, and I want to be careful here because I don't think that Islam as a tradition is necessarily homophobic, but in some of the countries, the Muslim population or their leaders are, and there's a sort of a contention for power or acceptance and a real fear of either physical harm or being overtaken by the other side in some countries, not all, but in some that have that split population. And I don't know, I mean, if I were to travel to Africa and talk to your friend in Uganda, I don't know what I would say. I don't know, I probably wouldn't go because it wouldn't be safe for me, but I'm not sure what, does anybody have a response to that particular concern? Like if you were talking to an Anglican bishop from an African country with sort of split Muslim Christian populations who was concerned about hegemony really of Christianity, that would, what would you say?
Who's talking? Sylvia?
Bob, I'm not sure if you were responding. Right, again, you're muted now.
There, okay, sure. Yeah, well, what would I say? I'm not sure. And yeah, as I said, we haven't seen him in several years.
Mhm.
Quite a few now. He's, as far as we know, he's in the United States. He's a brilliant person. He's got an amazing mind for statistics. He's a professional statistician, which he applies to population genetics. So, that kind of prejudice can show up in all kinds of places and amongst all kinds of people. What would I say? I don't know. I think if I had to talk with him about it now, I guess I'd probably tell him that I know many people who are validly homosexual and who are excellent people, contributors to their communities and the community at large. I would say that I understand the concern that you have, but I think he's a well-read individual, as I remember, and very thoughtful. And I think he might respond to a discussion that goes something like, let me see if I can get my mind together on this again. Something like, demagogues around the world become skilled at identifying people that they can make enemies, that they can cast as enemies. And that's part of their crowd pleasing strategy.
Thank you, Bob. I would bring into forth one more view, which comes from Peter's and my experience as plaintiff's civil union battle, fight, whatever it was, litigation. Peter and I got more attention from the evangelical Christian press than the women did. The women were hardly mentioned. There were 2 lesbian couples and Peter and I as the gay couple. And I think that was a kind of misogyny in and of itself, simply saying that what women do isn't that important, or it's for the pleasure of men. But if men start to mess around and emotionally and sexually, they are denying their role in the patriarchy. And I also think there was a piece for some, particularly evangelical patriarchal white men, the idea of being desired rather than being the one who desires is deeply frightening. So I have a feeling there's some subterranean things at work as well, related to ignorance about, lack of knowledge about homosexuality, but then also some much deeper fears that people are probably still way below the surface for some of these men, because the bishops are men. And I'm not sure how I thought, well, actually I do know. The best way to approach that is for them to meet your people and for people to tell their stories. Because Peter and I always used to say when we were traveling around the state or talking to churches or schools or wherever, it's much harder to say we hate Peter and Stan than to say we hate queer people. It's easier to say I hate FAGS than it is to say I hate Peter and Stan, because then we become real people. And I think as soon as you become real people, it changes the conversation. So
because you are real people, yeah, that's very clear. You're not the other group that's somewhere out there that can be cast as threatening.
You've probably all heard this, and Peter and I featured on the webpage of the Westboro Baptist Church, the Fred Phelps people in Topeka, Kansas, during the Civil Union battle, and under our picture it said Vermont fag beasts, and it had all the horrible things that should happen to us, both going to hell, but also physical things that should happen to us now for the position we were taking. That's a little tiny slice of what it must be like in Africa or some other countries for queer people who threaten the status quo and threaten the male version of what it is to be a man. So,
by the way, I keep muting you. Someone keeps muting me, which is good, because there's another Zoom conversation going on within earshot of this. We got 2 or 3 of them going on here tonight. So.
It is I who keeps muting you because that's creeping in, and when I hear it creep in, I have the power as your host to mute you, but I don't have the power to unmute you. So that's why I sometimes have to say you're muted. I have this little button that says, here, I'm going to do it for Noma. I can say, ask to unmute. Does something come up on your screen when I do that, Noma? What does it say?
It says stay muted or unmute.
Oh, interesting. So I can't do it for you, but I can ask you to. More thoughts. We certainly don't have to keep going till 8. Mary, are you thinking?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I remembered I was missing this was I was listening to the PBS News, and they were just talking about the new laws in Uganda that are just terrifying. It's just awful. So when you raise the question, if I were in Uganda and I was confronted with somebody who was homophobic, what would be the way I would conduct a conversation? And I think I would have to ask, the idea of meeting people, as you said, Stan, it's harder to hate a person than it is to hate an FAG. But I would want to be saying to this person, asking questions. I always start by asking questions, getting to know them and finding out what their thoughts are. And that gives me a better position in which to reply.
Thank you. That was a thumbs up. That's right. And Mary, you will get all the links and the stuff we read before you came on, so you'll be able to see that too. Yes, Betsy.
Yeah, well, it's actually a little of both of us. I was struck by the fellow who talked about how about the Islamic sense of I mean that they are so homophobic as well. And so he's fighting in his own mind a whole other culture that reinforces the homophobia. And that for him to think anything different is probably threatening for him, potentially life-threatening.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that's the attitude.
Well, I think some of these, the Christians in Africa, the bishops even will say they feel that their life is in danger if they take too strong a position about this.
I'm sure, and that they
That's
are.
the reality they live with. Or I would say, and I might more not snidely say, well, at least their position of power is in danger, but perhaps their physical self is really in danger too. And we don't know that. And again, I want to be really careful about painting Africa as the same place, because it's many, 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 many different countries. And I don't know enough about, I know some of the dioceses in Africa that are pro-LGBTQ, like South Africa and a few others. So I would be interested actually in learning more about which specific countries and dioceses. I know South Sudan, Uganda, but what are the ones that are most anti-LGBTQ in terms of same-sex marriage or ordination?
Yeah. Jane, you wanted to say something?
Not on that topic.
Go ahead. Something else.
Somebody has something.
As the youth shift.
I used to have a private practice for many years in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I would get invited from time to time to go over and speak to classes at the University of New Hampshire. And it would usually be a social work course or a religious course or something of that sort. And I found it very useful with a group of young people, college students, but not children, to have them write down their questions to ask me. And people would write down wonderful things that they would never say, so that the people next to them heard what they said. And invariably, one of the questions I would get would be, well, how did you get to be gay? And I'd say, I'll be glad to tell you about that, but first I want to know how you got to be straight. And they would look at me thunderstruck, like it couldn't possibly be the same process, and that was just a way of sort of getting us off and talking about what constitutes normal, quote unquote, in our culture.
I like that. My version of that, Jane, is to say to people when they say, when did you first know you were gay? I'll say, great question. When did you first know you were straight? Which
Exactly.
How did you know? What happened? What was your, who recruited you? No, I don't say that, but.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I know, I think, well, no, go ahead. I lost my thought.
That's all I had to say.
Miriam, you're freshly back from retreat. Do you have any sort of thoughts that bubble up from the spiritual place you've been?
I think the most important thing is communication and being able to, one-to-one is the best way. I like Jane's idea of having someone write down a question but one-to-one, like with the Bible study groups I came in late. I thought I started at 7, sorry. But like with those small groups, I think getting into a place where you're comfortable, and so getting into maybe discussing things that you have in common. I know in Sacred Ground, one of the most things that impressed me the most was there was somebody, a really right wing and a left, like someone that started the Proud Boys, not Proud Boys, but maybe Betsy could help me with that. But it was like two very opposite groups, and that they had discussions, and that in finding the things that were common, they were able to expand and see being able, they were comfortable enough with each other in finding the things that were common, that they were able to listen without prejudice. They were able to listen and truly listen to what the person had to say. And then that kind of back and forth conversation. And it seems to me that that's almost the only way we can do that is through one-to-one conversations, bishop to bishop, church member to church member, in groups that are like Sacred Ground. Sacred Ground deals with all kinds of racial inequalities with BIPOC, but you could do the same thing with LGBTQ. And it all comes from the same thing. It all comes from our Anglo-Saxon heritage. And I mean, it goes even back further than that. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament and the chosen people. And, you know, so, but I think that conversation on a one-to-one basis, and getting to know people as people, and getting to know people as beloved, that God, we all know that God loves every one of us. And you have to know that God loves someone that's gay as much as he loves someone that's straight. And that's a good place, I think, to start. And I'm rambling, but.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Betsy, I was going to ask you also, since you've just been on pilgrimage in the South, do you bring anything back from that you'd like to share in terms of this conversation?
Well, I was so impressed or moved really with it in the Legacy Museum when we went through all the hardships and sorrowful things about the African experience in this country, but came out to a room with a whole the walls were covered with pictures of African Americans who had had made a difference in in changing the people's feelings about Black people. It was so moving to see the efforts, well, enormous efforts that went on and still go on to improve the relationships, or to improve to bring out the worthiness that's intrinsic in Black people
and
people in general. I was also thinking that as there are more and more gay clergy and bishops, I mean, there's where actually having more either lay people and or regular clergy, not just bishops, at the Lambeth Conference, including a number of gay people there. There'd been opportunity for, I mean, I think it should be mandated because then there's an opportunity for individuals, bishops, the African bishops or any anti-gay bishops to have a one-to-one talk with an LGBTQ, whatever, anyway, per people.
And right, three
Yeah,
bishops.
it is.
Go
It
ahead.
is go ahead, Stan.
No, you finish up. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, well, I was just saying that's a way to expand the people who go to Lambeth, or the kinds of people who go. So there are more gay and lesbian people there that can be gotten to be known as individuals and having those individual conversations.
And all the bishops do report that those prayer tables, or whatever they call them, which are set up intentionally to have diversity at the table, are one of the most powerful places to communicate, where some African bishops meet some of the gay bishops from the US, and vice versa. And only a few bishops, notably a couple from South Sudan apparently, were intransigent in that, but most of them were more than willing to talk. And I remember even our previous bishop, Tom Ely, had quite a good relationship with the bishop of Sudan and South Sudan from a different basis, because we have Sudanese here. So I'm just going to show you again what you're all going to get. You're all going to get this thing, which will have the link to Bishop Hirschfield's statement, the link to Thomas Brown's statement, what Bishop Dion Johnson wrote at my request, by the way, what Bishop Jennifer Riddall wrote at my request, what our own bishop wrote quite beautifully that appeared in the Mountain. And then the very last page will be the resolution as it was brought to the floor of our diocesan convention last year. So I'd ask you all to look at those things when you get them. Think about that resolution. How would we change it or keep it or alter it to still have power and agency, but also be something that can get passed by our diocesan convention and then in some form passed at General Convention to be sent to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that's what you'll be getting. I'll send that out probably tomorrow morning, and you'll all get it in an email. Yes, Miriam.
What other dioceses besides Vermont are working on these?
I don't know that, and I'm hoping to learn that. What will happen at General Convention is all of the resolutions that come in from dioceses and bishops and deputies and other organizations, they all have different letters in front of them, get sent to an appropriate legislative committee, which then looks at all the resolutions they receive and they conflate some of them. So if there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 resolutions related to LGBTQ folk in the Anglican Communion, that legislative committee will get them and probably combine them and combine the language. So it's very unlikely the floor of the General Convention will see our resolution as written. So what we want is a resolution that we write that has a good chance of getting through, at least in its core, if that makes sense. What I'd like to do now is it seems like a okay time to come in for a landing on this. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your attention. I'm going to put up in the chat Miriam Burns' favorite night prayer. And Miriam, would you mind, let's see if I can pull down, it's not wanting to move for me. Tell you what, Miriam, I'm going to put it up this way.
I can grab my prayer book.
Why don't you just grab your prayer book? Because for some reason the chat doesn't want to move. You can see the last part of it, but you can't. Oh, there it goes. I just did it. It did it.
Okay.
Would you read it for us, please?
Sure.
We can't see it.
Oh, can you see it, Miriam?
No, I've got my.
Okay, you'll just read it from your prayer book. Sorry about that, folks.
Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to a new day, new joys, new possibilities. In your name we pray.
Amen. Thank you all. I'm going to turn off the recording and the nice woman will tell us that's happened.